I was at a quiet lounge last night, the kind of place where you'd expect to see nervous first dates or anniversary toasts. At the table next to mine, there was a couple well-dressed, mid-30s, leaning in close. The lighting was low, the wine was expensive, and for a second, it looked like a scene straight out of a classic romance. But then, the woman didn't reach for his hand. She reached for her tablet. She swiped through a series of colorful charts, not vacation photos, but a professional risk assessment of her own career trajectory and a 10-year liquidity forecast. She spoke with a calm, clinical precision about hedging against market volatility and maintaining a low-entropy household system. What was even more striking was the man's reaction. He didn't look put off or insulted. Instead, he nodded with a visible sense of relief, as if he'd finally found someone who spoke his language. He opened a spreadsheet on his phone to show his own career resilience index and his portfolio's exposure to geopolitical shocks. Watching them, I realized I wasn't witnessing a courtship. I was watching a high-stakes merger. There was no talk of soulmates or destiny. They were two independent economic units negotiating a defensive partnership to survive an era of global instability. That cold, calculated exchange at Table 4 is the new face of 2026. The pure love filter has been systematically stripped away by years of economic trauma and asset price swings. We've entered the age of the actuary, where marriage is no longer a leap of faith, but a calculated move to secure an asset class hard matching against a world that feels increasingly like it's spinning out of control. Why do we stop looking for the one and start looking for the one with the most stable balance sheet? And in this new defensive partnership era, what happens to the 80% of the population who simply can't pass this brutal new audit?
Okay, let's just unpack that moment, that scene in the lounge. It's more than just a funny story, right? It feels like it's a real signal.
It's a huge signal. What you saw was a shift from, personal connection to something more like a forensic financial audit.
Exactly. And it implies this really fundamental change in what people now see as necessary for survival. So the question for this deep dive is, what is this new audit actually prioritizing?
Well, the data backs up what you saw. It confirms this really profound and strategic pivot in what people look for in a partner.
A pivot away from what exactly?
We're moving away from assessing these static markers of wealth, things like inheriting a house or having a big savings account one year.
Things that are fixed.
Right. And we're moving toward measuring these dynamic survival capabilities. The real focus is on resilience, on liquidity and stability in a world that is just persistently volatile.
So if stability is the new, let's say, foundation of a relationship, how does that look different for men and for women? Because you have to assume the pressures from this new economic reality, they aren't symmetrical.
Oh, they're absolutely not symmetrical. Not at all. If we look at the evolution of female criteria first, it's fascinating.
Okay.
We see this huge shift in what's being prioritized. It's now about high liquidity survival capabilities and, this is key, proven cross-cycle professional stability.
Cross-cycle stability. So not just a good job now, but a job that can survive a recession.
Precisely. You can think of it as a modern version of an evolutionary environmental security detector. It's a system kicking in.
An environmental security detector.
Yeah. When the environment is volatile, with unpredictable inflation, AI disrupting jobs, geopolitical shocks, those traditional fixed assets can suddenly become worthless, or at least illiquid.
That makes sense. A house is a great asset, but only until the housing bubble bursts. But if your partner is, say, a nurse practitioner or an accountant with a regulated license, that's almost a guaranteed income stream no matter what the market does.
That is the perfect example. That's resilience. It's not just about the salary they earn this year. It's their proven ability to withstand these shocks and stay valuable across multiple economic cycles.
So the market is demanding a high career resilience index, like that guy had on his phone.
It is. The system is just reacting rationally to all this global uncertainty by finding partners who can guarantee the unit's survival through a crisis.
Okay, that makes perfect sense as a defensive move. But what about the other side? What about the strategic shift we're seeing in what men are looking for? How has the age of the actuary changed their preferences?
For men, the shift is, I'd say, intensely strategic. It's all about risk mitigation.
Hedging their bets.
Exactly. They are increasingly and explicitly seeking dual income defensive partnerships. The partner's professional background, their career, their earning potential is now seen as a critical risk hedging tool.
Against what specifically?
Against modern middle-class structural vulnerability. The old idea that one high-earning person, doctor or a lawyer, could comfortably support a whole family in a big city, That idea seems almost quaint now.
It's basically obsolete.
It is, especially when you're facing such high volatility in housing and education costs. A second stable income isn't a bonus anymore. It's the most effective form of mutual defense you can have.
So it prevents the whole ship from sinking if one person loses their job or gets sick?
That's the goal. Mutual defense and longevity. It's not just about supplementing an income. It's about ensuring the unit survives.
And this brings us right to the core of what we need to dig into. If the whole goal is to minimize risk with this defensive dual income strategy, we have to ask, does it actually work? I mean, what does the real-world economic data say about which partnership structure is the safest and which one might actually be the riskiest?
And the validation for this is it's clear and it's absolutely crucial. We looked at these detailed studies of household structures across 20 OECD nations.
So 20 industrialized countries, that's a great data set.
It is, because it lets us compare outcomes across places with really different social safety nets, different levels of gender equality. And what it gives us is this definitive hierarchy of economic security.
And this hierarchy is based on what metric?
It's based on disposable household income, or DHI.
Right. So the actual money a household has left after all the taxes and government transfers, it's the true measure of what they can actually spend.
Exactly. And when you lay out the hierarchy, it's striking.
Right.
At the absolute top, consistently in all 20 countries.
Let me guess. The dual earner couples.
The dual earner couples. Their mutual defense system provides by far the strongest financial base and the lowest overall risk.
And at the bottom.
At the bottom, tending to have the lowest DHI, even after you control for things like age and where they live, are the pure breadwinner couples, the ones relying on a single income.
So the data just flat out confirms the actuary's preference. 2 jobs are safer than 1.
It strongly validates that rational preference, yes.
But you brought up a really vital point earlier. The gender of that single earner in the breadwinner model, does it actually matter if the sole income is from a man or from a woman?
It matters fundamentally. And this is where that gendered vulnerability becomes just starkly visible. When you compare the pure female breadwinners, the FBWs, where the woman is the only one earning, with the pure male breadwinners, the MBWs, the finding is consistent, and frankly, it's shocking.
Okay.
Across all 20 of these industrialized countries, pure female breadwinners never achieve a higher disposable household income than pure male breadwinners.
Never. Not in a single country.
Not once.
Wow. That is an enormous statistical finding. It means the ceiling for financial security is just consistently lower for any household that relies only on a woman's salary. It doesn't matter if it's in the US or Sweden.
That's exactly right. In 12 of the 20 countries, the FBW couples had statistically significantly lower DHI. And in the other 8,
The more progressive ones.
the ones you'd think of, yes, Canada, Finland, the Netherlands, in those, the difference was statistically insignificant, which means the incomes were kind of comparable. But even there, the female breadwinner income still never exceeded the male breadwinner income.
So at best, it's a tie, but usually it's much worse.
At best, it's a tie. This persistent penalty makes that single female breadwinner household the most financially vulnerable of all the couple types.
This confirms it then. There's a pervasive female breadwinner penalty. Let's really dissect the causes of that, because it sounds like it's not just one thing. It's probably a mix of market forces and structural problems.
It is. It's a combination of things.
Yeah.
But the primary driver, the biggest piece of the puzzle, is the earnings disadvantage.
Just a straight up wage gap.
Yes. In every single country they examined, except for Slovenia, these pure FBW women had significantly lower average individual labor earnings than the pure MBW men.
Which isn't a huge surprise given what we know about global wage gaps.
Right, but what's really crucial here is that this earnings gap holds even when you meticulously control for working hours and for professional status.
So you're comparing apples to apples. A female manager working 40 hours a week to a male manager working 40 hours a week.
Exactly. And she is still, on average, bringing home less money for the household.
And that has to have huge downstream consequences. It's not just about less cash flow every month, right?
The downstream consequences are serious, and they are enduring. I mean, if your primary earner consistently brings in less, your household has a structural disadvantage in building any kind of long-term wealth.
So things like retirement savings.
Retirement savings get hammered. The compounding effect is drastically reduced. It impacts your ability to acquire assets, like saving for a down payment on a house. And on top of that, Lower earnings often mean less access to really good employer benefits, like high-quality health insurance.
So it creates this whole other layer of systemic risk for the family unit.
The penalty isn't just happening in the present, it's compounding, and it can become generational.
So why does this gap happen so specifically for female breadwinners? I mean, are women just choosing lower paying jobs when they become the sole earner, or is something forcing them into that position?
It's often forced by circumstance. We call it the emergency factor.
The emergency factor.
In a lot of these cases, the woman's breadwinner status is reactionary. It's triggered because the male partner becomes unemployed or ill or just can't work. The most compelling example comes from Finland.
What happened in Finland?
In Finland, a staggering 91% of the men in these pure female breadwinner couples were reported as unemployed.
91%. So she's not the breadwinner by choice, she's the breadwinner by necessity.
Precisely. It's what economists call the added worker effect. The female partner has to rapidly ramp up her work hours or enter the workforce to compensate for the sudden loss of the male partner's income.
And I imagine when you're reacting that quickly, you don't have time to find the optimal high-paying job. You just take what you can get.
You take what you can get. This rapid reactionary shift means she often enters that high-earning role without the necessary career runway. We see this very acutely in Mediterranean countries. In Spain, for example, the pure male breadwinners had, on average, 26 years of labor market experience. The pure female breadwinners, only 19 years. They are forced to step up immediately, and that often means accepting less secure, lower-paying work in the service industry or other precarious sectors just to keep the family afloat.
So she isn't the highest potential earner in the couple. She's the only available earner.
That's the perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
And that dramatically increases the risk profile of the whole household.
Okay, so the labor market is structurally failing these women through wage gaps and these emergency situations. So what about the safety net, the welfare system? Is it stepping in to, mitigate that risk?
Regrettably, no. The welfare systems across most of these industrialized countries are failing to adequately compensate for this female breadwinner penalty.
How so?
The systems were, historically designed around that pure male breadwinner model, and their current structure just really struggles to support this non-traditional FBW household.
So they're built for a world that doesn't exist anymore.
Right. And get this. In about half of the countries studied, the pure FBW couples actually receive less benefit income than the MBW couples, even though the FBW households have lower labor incomes to begin with.
Wait, that seems completely backward. Can you give me an example of where the system breaks down like that?
Sure. Look at Australia, Czechia, Estonia, and Slovakia. In those 4 countries, the FBW couples get statistically significantly lower benefit incomes.
Why?
Well, in the Eastern European countries, Czechia, Estonia, Slovakia, it reflects the really lean employment benefits that are available, which is devastating because the male partners in these couples are overwhelmingly unemployed. So the system provides almost no help for him.
But hold on, if the men in the male breadwinner couples are often employed, why are they getting more benefits?
That is the structural bias. The women in the male breadwinner couples are more likely to be out of the workforce for domestic reasons like childcare or homemaking. So the household qualifies for more generous family allowances, child tax credits, things related to dependent care. The system basically categorizes the male breadwinner household as deserving of family support, but it categorizes the female breadwinner household as just dealing with an unemployed worker, the man who only gets minimal unemployment insurance, if he gets any at all.
So the benefits aren't targeted at the family's income level, they're targeted at the family structure.
Exactly. And the structure it was designed for is the old one.
This first section has it's completely validated this new actuary age preference. The rational choice clearly is a dual earner partnership. The data shows it's the most secure. And the single income structure, especially the one relying on a woman, is just systemically fragile.
It's riddled with these deep-seated penalties,
which transforms courtship into this extreme risk calculation. And that brings us to the next big question, the why. Why do people execute this calculation by, it seems, ignoring their own personal private feelings?
That is the key philosophical and practical jump, isn't it? Why, when you're faced with what is probably the most complex, personal, and irreversible decision of your life?
Choosing partner.
Right. Why do people default to these clinical, observable, and kind of shallow economic metrics instead of deep, personal, unquantifiable assessments?
Love, chemistry, all that stuff.
All of that. And this is where we have to bring in the logic of informational failure. specifically a concept from game theory called the information cascade.
When you talk about high-stakes decision-making under uncertainty, you make marriage sound less like a romance and more like a 40-year investment contract.
That is exactly how the rational actor is viewing it in this high volatility environment. The game theory analysis suggests that what you called asset class hard matching has become the only incentive-compatible solution to mitigate a problem called contractual asymmetry.
Contractual asymmetry. Okay, break that down for me.
It's just the risk that your partner, over the next few decades, will fail to uphold their side of the financial bargain, that their career will tank or they'll be a bad financial partner, and your life outcomes will plummet as a result.
So because you can't really audit trust, you audit their balance sheet instead.
Exactly. Since trust is expensive and difficult to verify, observable assets act as a low-cost, easy-to-read proxy for that trust.
Okay, let's simplify the core idea of an information cascade before we apply it to dating, because it sounds like a concept that could explain a lot of modern behavior.
Good idea. Let's say you're choosing between two new, equally priced restaurants that just opened. You have two signals you can use.
Okay.
First, you have your private signal. Maybe you personally taste the food at one of them and you think, it's average. Second, you have the public history. You look outside and you see a huge line of 50 people waiting to get into the other restaurant.
Right. So my private signal, my own taste, says this place is mediocre. But the public history, the crowd is screaming that I must be wrong.
Precisely. In this kind of sequential decision-making, when the public information, what you see the herd doing, overwhelms your own private signal, the rational thing to do is to ignore your own subjective information and follow the herd.
So you joined the line for the crowded restaurant.
You join the line, not because you think the food is good, but because you think the crowd knows something that you don't. That is an information cascade.
And this is where the whole system gets stuck. Because by joining the line, I'm not adding any new information to the public pool. I'm just making the line one person longer.
That's the core inefficiency. Once people fall into a cascade, their actions become uninformative to everyone who comes after them. They stop relying on their private information, so the private information never gets shared. Social learning just stops.
And the herd can end up settling on the wrong choice.
It can lead to an incorrect cascade, yes. If the first few people who started the trend were just mistaken, or they were relying on bad initial data, the entire crowd can follow them off a cliff.
Okay, this is a sharp, cold logic. Let's apply it now to the really high-stakes decision of choosing a spouse.
The analogy holds up perfectly. The action is choosing a partner. You either adopt or reject.
Okay.
Your public information is that set of objective, quantifiable metrics we've been talking about. Salary, career stability, financial health, their educational background, the visible asset class.
And my private signal is the unquantifiable stuff.
Exactly. Deep compatibility, their personality, their sense of humor, their loyalty, and, yes, love.
So if I meet someone whose asset class audit is perfect, great income, high resilience index, no debt, but my private signal, my gut, is telling me we have zero chemistry or our life goals are totally different, the cascade logic says I should ignore my gut.
If the public history, the collective actions of your peers who are all prioritizing these asset class matches and seem to be achieving financial security, if that seems more robust and certain than your subjective feeling, then the rational choice is to suppress the private signal.
Because why gamble on something as fuzzy as chemistry when you can lock in a high DHI outcome, which is statistically proven to be safer?
Precisely. This really highlights what's called the bounded signal problem. Your private signal of compatibility is bounded. It's uncertain, it's nuanced, you can't easily put a number on it. But the asset class, that's crystal clear in public.
And because that private signal isn't certain, the system can get stuck on the wrong outcome.
If those subjective private signals are bounded, meaning not arbitrarily accurate, then what we call asymptotic learning, the process of eventually making the perfectly informed choice, it just fails. This means incorrect outcomes, like pairing up purely for financial gain while ignoring personal fulfillment, are not only possible, but they're likely to persist.
And these cascades form quickly, you said.
Very quickly. As soon as the perceived social belief in the value of asset matching becomes more precise than your own individual gut feeling, you rationally fall in line.
Wait a second, though. You've laid out this very compelling argument that it's economically rational to follow this cascade and prioritize the balance sheet. But isn't that a highly irrational long-term strategy for, personal happiness, for the actual durability of the partnership? Are we just optimizing for the wrong thing?
That is the critical paradox of the age of the actuary. It is completely rational at the individual level, but it leads to high societal inefficiency.
How so?
The problem is that all these rational actors, all trying to mitigate their own individual risk, they inadvertently create a system where the subjective long-term compatibility data, the very stuff that actually ensures a marriage can survive a job loss or a health crisis, is systematically ignored. It never gets aggregated.
So you're optimizing for the measurable thing, the DHI, at the expense of the unmeasurable thing, which is the relationship quality itself.
And that inefficiency leads directly to what we call socioeconomic closure.
Right.
When financial stability and low risk are the public metrics that define a successful pairing, people naturally gravitate to partners who match their own financial precision. It's a rational attempt to mitigate that risk of contractual asymmetry.
But it has this big exclusionary outcome for society as a whole.
It does, a systematic and self-reinforcing one.
How severe is this closure? You mentioned earlier the exclusion of the bottom 80%. Is that real?
That's the outcome. The model systematically excludes the bottom 80% of the population from what is now the most desirable partnership pool, that pool being defined by these high asset class hard matchers.
And you're saying it's not malicious, it's just the logical result of the audit.
It's just the audit. If I am highly secure and I'm looking to hedge my own risk, I simply cannot afford to partner with someone whose liquidity forecast is chaotic. It directly jeopardizes my own DHI, my own resilience. If you can't audit the quality of the person, their character, their commitment, you audit the asset class as a proxy for their security.
So the age of the actuary is, by its very nature, creating a deeply unequal pairing system. It's locking in resource advantages at the top. And because it's a cascade, you said these matches are path dependent.
They get fixed early on. The pairings that are perceived as successful fix the path for everyone who comes later. They see the financial security of those matches. They emulate the behavior, and that just reinforces the cascade.
And yet, for all their economic rationality, you also said these asset-matched partnerships are inherently fragile. Why fragile? They sound financially bulletproof.
Because the entire cascade, the entire relationship is built on a continuation of that public information, the observable stability.
Right.
And cascades can be broken by new, accurate information. A shock to the system. For a relationship built purely on financial metrics, that shock could be a market crash that wipes out a portfolio.
Or a major job loss that destroys that career resilience index.
Or a health crisis that drains all their liquidity. The moment the public information that underpinned the whole relationship collapses, the person is forced back onto their private signal. The actual quality of the relationship, which they may have spent years or even decades actively ignoring.
That is a fascinating conclusion. The individual pursuit of perfect rationality and financial security in dating ultimately leads to this systemic social inefficiency and, ironically, increased relationship fragility, because the system is starved of the robust, unquantifiable signals you need for long-term emotional durability. So while the economic and game theory behind this is really compelling, it's not happening in a vacuum, right? The rise of this actuary age is being shaped by some massive social and psychological forces. Let's look at the broader demographic context here.
Absolutely. We see several overlapping trends that really confirm the primacy of economic status in modern dating. One really crucial observation is how economic inequality itself affects what people look for in a partner. Studies show that men, when you compare them to women, tend to express a preference for living in societies with less economic inequality, especially when they're looking for a long-term partner.
That feels counterintuitive. Wouldn't you think high-status men would prefer a highly unequal society where their status gives them a huge advantage in the dating market?
Not necessarily when they're thinking about a long-term partnership. The preference seems to be linked to the intense pressure of maintaining that status after you've committed to someone. Men seem to anticipate that their quality of life might actually decline in these highly unequal environments after marriage. Probably because that structural inequality places this constant, intense pressure on the male provider to maintain an increasingly high resource standard of living, a burden they feel they can't sustain on their own.
So they want a less demanding financial environment for the family unit? What about women's expectations in that same scenario?
Conversely, women may anticipate an improvement in their quality of life after marriage in those highly unequal environments.
So they're seeing an opportunity.
It suggests women are rationally seeking security from a concentrated pool of resources. In a polarized society, securing a high-status partner provides a much larger, more durable shield against all the external instability than just relying on your own means. The risk calculus is just fundamentally different.
Men see high inequality as a threat to their stability. Women see it as an opportunity for a defensive partnership.
A simplified way to put it, but yes.
And all of this calculating, all this auditing, it must contribute to the significant delay we're seeing in long-term commitment. If you're waiting for that optimal asset match, you're naturally going to wait longer to get married. What does the data show there?
The evidence on that is just undeniable across the industrialized West. The average age of marriage is climbing consistently.
Yeah.
In the U.S., it's around 30 for men and 28 for women now.
Right.
But the more profound shift is in lifetime marital status.
Right.
As of 2021, a really striking 25% of 40-year-olds in the U.S. had never been married.
1 in 4 40-year-olds never married. That is a massive demographic shift.
It's huge. That figure is a nearly 400% increase from 1980, when only 6% of 40-year-olds had never married. This isn't just a small societal tweak. It suggests a deep structural change in how easy or desirable or even feasible it is to get married.
And the delay gives people more time to get their own balance sheet in order, to finish grad school, pay down debt, build that career stability.
It makes them more audit-worthy.
Exactly. And this pressure must be felt most acutely by the generation that's right in the middle of this, millennials.
Yes. Millennials, born between 82 and 97, they're facing these intense financial headwinds, high student debt, volatile careers. Over half of them, 52%, report feeling significantly behind in their life goals.
Especially marriage and kids.
Especially marriage and children. But despite that feeling of falling behind, 64% of them still say they want a committed long-term relationship. The desire is there. It's just the environmental security you need to execute the asset class match. That's what's delayed or stubbornly out of reach.
This kind of pressure must be what feeds those extreme narratives we hear all the time online. The idea that 80% of women are all pursuing only 20% of men, creating this dating apocalypse. It aligns with the game theory closure you talked about, but it takes it to a statistical extreme. How does the evidence stack up against those claims?
It is so crucial to treat those extreme statistical assertions with caution. These narratives are often driven by data that's been cherry-picked from specific dating app behavior or just amplified by social media. National survey data does not support this degree of severe, widespread concentration.
So the whole hypergamy debate, the theory that without social pressure for monogamy, a small elite of high-value men would capture all the mating attention, that just doesn't reflect what most people are actually doing.
That's correct. When you look at the national long-term data on sexual behavior and pair bonding, what you find is that there's been essentially no meaningful change in the average number of lifetime sexual partners for about 95% of the population over the last 10, 20, 30 years.
So most people are still pairing up.
The vast majority of the country continues to form long-term pair bonds and have multiple partnerships throughout their lives. The perception of an extreme 80-20 crisis is often a localized thing, or, and this is key, an artifact of the market mechanics you find on online dating platforms.
Okay, so if that extreme polarization is a myth, or at least highly exaggerated, where is the real polarization that does align with the age of the actuary?
The polarization that we do observe is fundamentally economic and educational, and it aligns perfectly with this search for dual income stability.
How so?
We see a very clear divergence in household structure based on education level. Higher educated women are typically found in stable, full-time, dual-earner arrangements with equally employed partners.
And lower educated women.
They're often inactive or unemployed and are significantly more likely to be partnered with a single male breadwinner, which just perpetuates all the risks we talked about with the single income model. The real divide isn't about some arbitrary social status. It's about access to education, to stable careers, and therefore to low-risk partnership models.
And this brings us to online dating. Because the platforms feel like the ultimate engine of the actuary age. They're basically designed to facilitate this exact auditing process.
They are. They make all this information immediately available and searchable.
So does making the search easier actually lead to better, more stable outcomes? Or does it just accelerate the information cascade?
Well, the platforms certainly provide this unprecedented broad access and efficiency, which is a huge help for people who are introverted or live in remote areas. The data shows about 42% of U.S. adults feel that online dating has genuinely made the search for a long-term partner easier.
But there's a but.
There is. This efficiency comes at a cost. It subjects users to these intense, unforgiving market dynamics and some very unique psychological stresses.
And what are those specific dynamics? How do they differ by gender?
There's a profound gender imbalance in how the platforms are experienced. Women overwhelmingly face the stress of information overload. About 54% of women report feeling just overwhelmed by the sheer volume of messages they receive.
So they're dealing with this massive influx of potential partners, and they have to filter them somehow.
They have to apply highly stringent filtering criteria, which often just defaults back to the most easily observable public metrics, back to the asset class.
So women are overwhelmed by quantity, and they use the economic audit as a coping mechanism. What about men?
Men face a crisis of quality and validation. Because the platforms tend to funnel attention to a smaller, perceived high-value pool, a staggering 64% of men report feeling insecure because of a consistent lack of messages or responses.
Compared to 40% of women feeling that way.
Right. The platform, by giving you this immediate quantified feedback or lack of it, it reinforces the perception of a hyper-competitive, polarized market, no matter what the national data actually says. It makes the actuary age feel even more brutal than it might be in the real world.
And the demographics on these platforms are the exact people trying to secure their financial futures.
Exactly. I mean, it's most heavily used by the youngest adults, 18 to 29-year-olds. But it's still heavily used by 37% of 30 to 49-year-olds.
Yeah.
And that latter group is the one that's actively focused on career building, family planning, and long-term security. They're using this hyper-efficient, if stressful machine to execute their calculated asset match.
Because the perceived risk of an unaudited relationship just feels too high.
It feels unacceptably high.
So we started this deep dive with that couple in the lounge, treating their courtship like a financial audit, negotiating a merger against global instability. And what we've learned is that this cold, clinical approach, it's not a failure of character or a lack of emotion. It's a rational defensive strategy.
It's rooted in fundamental economic and game theory. The age of the actuary is really defined by two interlocking and I think inescapable dynamics. First, you have the individual pursuit of the economically safest choice, which demands ignoring your private, unquantifiable signals in favor of public measurable metrics like career resilience and liquidity.
And
Second, you have the devastating societal outcome of that choice. While asset class matching creates these optimal, incentive-compatible mergers at the very top of the resource pyramid, it concurrently and systemically amplifies the vulnerability of the lower-income majority.
And that fragility is felt most acutely by those single female breadwinner households.
They face that pervasive earnings penalty and an inadequate systemic support system that was designed for a different, long-gone economic era.
The transition from looking for love to looking for liquidity is maybe the most profound marker of living in a globally unstable world. We see that the rational choices of individuals just trying to find stability with limited and costly information lead directly to herd behavior, the information cascade, and to high societal inefficiency.
And the ultimate irony is that by seeking to maximize stability, we force the majority of people to ignore the very private signals of compatibility and chemistry that might have created a more durable, if less auditable, partnership in the first place.